The letter came on a Tuesday. Plain envelope. HOA letterhead. Nothing fancy, but the words inside? They hit like a gut punch. Your home has been reviewed and deemed overly tactical in appearance. Its visual impact has raised concern among several neighbors. It does not conform to the community's aesthetic values and may cause alarm. Alarm? My house? I read it again, then again. Still made no sense. They called it tactical, like it was a threat. Like it wasn't just a house, but something dangerous. They made it sound like I'd parked a tank on the lawn or mounted a turret on the roof. But all I'd done was build a home. Solid, efficient, safe, not flashy, not loud, just prepared, just right. That's when it hit me. They had no idea why it looked the way it did. No clue who had built it or what it meant to the people who helped me raise it. They didn't know about the years behind the design, the hands that laid the foundation, the team behind the blueprints. They only saw what they didn't understand, and fear does funny things to people. So I put the letter down, took a long breath, looked out at the place I'd poured everything into, and I made a decision. If they wanted a story, I'd give them one. Because this wasn't just about siding and shingles. This was about legacy, brotherhood, and the kind of safety that comes from a life spent knowing what real danger looks like. They called my home a threat. They were about to find out what it really was. Before this letter, before the HOA's complaints, my home was just that, a home. But not just any home. It was born from years of service, hard lessons, and a bond that only those who face danger together can understand. I spent 2 decades as a combat engineer in the military. We built roads, bridges, and yes, sometimes bunkers. We worked in places where every nail, every beam, had to stand up to more than just the weather. It had to withstand the unexpected. Explosions, heavy fire, the kind of pressure you don't get in normal life. But what I remember most aren't the missions or the medals. It's the brothers and sisters who stood by me. The tight team that worked side by side, sweating and struggling to build something solid when everything else was falling apart. When I retired, I wanted to carry that spirit forward. I bought a plot of land away from the noise, somewhere quiet but not disconnected. Then I reached out to those same old friends, fellow combat engineers who knew exactly what I wanted. Together, we designed the house. Not a fortress, but a home built to last. Reinforced walls, sure, but not so heavy they'd feel like a bunker. Windows positioned for light and safety. Solar panels on the roof for clean energy. A rainwater collection system so we wouldn't be caught off guard if the power went out or the taps ran dry. Every detail had a purpose. It wasn't about showing off or scaring neighbors. It was about building a place that could protect and sustain us, not just from storms, but from whatever life might throw our way. The house took months to build. I remember the sweat on our brows, the quiet laughter when we shared stories over sandwiches in the shade, the way every beam felt like a promise that this was a place where we could finally rest, a place to heal. That home, my home, was built with love, sweat, and honor, not to intimidate, but to stand strong, to remind us that safety doesn't come from hiding, it comes from being prepared. But the HOA didn't see that. They just saw too tactical, too different, too much to understand. They didn't see the hands that built it, the hearts behind every brick. And that's when I knew this fight wasn't just about a house. It was about respect, about telling a story that needed to be heard. At first the complaints seemed small, almost petty. The HOA sent a letter about the unusual window shape on the front of my house. They said it didn't fit with the neighborhood's style. Then, another note about the thickness of the concrete walls. Too industrial, they said. Solar panels. They called them an eyesore because of the angle. I tried to brush it off. I figured it was just the usual picky stuff any new homeowner faces. But the whispers from neighbors started to grow louder. Did you see that house? Looks like a bunker. It's too militant, like they're preparing for war or something. That place makes me uneasy. One afternoon, an HOA representative showed up at my door, calm but firm. He said, "Your home's design could cause panic in the community. It looks too tactical. People are concerned." I tried to explain that the house was built to strict building codes, that every feature had a practical purpose, that it wasn't meant to intimidate anyone. But my words fell on deaf ears. They didn't want to understand. They only saw what scared them, a house that looked like it belonged on a military base, not a quiet neighborhood. Then came the notice, a fine, for failure to comply with community aesthetic guidelines. It wasn't just about windows or solar panels anymore. It was personal. I looked out over my yard, at the home my brothers and I had built with pride, and I realized this was no longer just a disagreement about architecture. This was a fight for respect, for the meaning behind every beam and every nail. Because sometimes, the hardest battles aren't on distant fields. Sometimes, they happen right in your own backyard. Weeks passed, and things only got worse. One morning, a neighbor stopped by with news. "Did you hear?" she asked carefully. The HOA had a meeting last night about your house. I was stunned. They hadn't invited me. Not once. The meeting was held behind closed doors, without my knowledge or presence, and during that meeting, the HOA board took a vote. The result? My home was officially labeled out of character with community aesthetics. Out of character. The phrase felt like a punch to the gut, like I was some kind of outcast, or worse, a threat to the neighborhood's peace. I wanted to shout, to storm in and demand a fair hearing, but I didn't. I knew anger wouldn't win this fight. It would only give them more reason to dismiss me. So I took a deep breath, swallowed the frustration, and began to plan. This wasn't just about siding or paint color anymore. It was about standing up for the story behind that house, the hands that built it, the lives it represented. I reached out to my old unit, the men and women who had helped me design and build that home. We would not just defend the house legally. We would defend its meaning. We'd show the HOA and the whole neighborhood that this was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of brotherhood, resilience, and honor. And if they wanted a fight, I'd give them one they couldn't ignore. Because sometimes, you don't just build a house, you build a stand. And I was ready to take mine. When I realized the HOA wasn't just going to back down, I knew I had to bring in reinforcements, not lawyers, though I kept one on standby. But the people who knew this house better than anyone, my combat engineer buddies. I called them up, old friends who had stood beside me in some of the toughest places on earth. We shared more than just memories, we shared a mission. And this mission was personal. A few days later, they showed up. Not in suits, not in casual clothes, but in their uniforms, the ones that carried the weight of experience and trust. I wasn't trying to intimidate the HOA board. I wanted them to understand, to see the house through our eyes. The meeting was tense. The board members shuffled in, some with skeptical looks, others clearly uncomfortable. One by one, my friends stepped forward. First, a structural engineer, who had helped design the reinforced walls. He explained the building specs, the exact thickness of the concrete, and how it was built not for war, but to meet earthquake and storm safety codes far beyond local requirements. Next, a solar energy specialist broke down the solar panel setup. It wasn't just for saving electricity. It was a deliberate design to keep the home powered during emergencies, storms, blackouts, or worse. Then, a water resource expert detailed the rainwater collection system, how it allowed the house to be self-sufficient in droughts or crises. Every feature was practical, sustainable, and completely legal. They explained that this home wasn't about weapons or warfare. It was about readiness, disaster readiness, environmental responsibility, and support for veterans like us who needed a safe place to call home. The HOA board sat in silence. Some faces shifted from suspicion to curiosity. One board member, a man in his 60s, finally spoke. "Wait a minute. I know you," he said, eyes narrowing as he stared at one of my friends. It was a retired logistics officer from my unit. A man I'd served with overseas, someone I never expected to see again in a place like this. The room's energy shifted. That board member shared quietly that he'd kept his military past a secret too. He understood now why the house looked the way it did, and he apologized for the misunderstanding. The rest of the board started asking questions, real questions. Not about rules or fines, but about the story behind the house, the people who built it, and the purpose it served. What had been a confrontation turned into a conversation. For the first time, I felt the walls I'd built weren't just concrete and steel. They were bridges, connecting past to present, misunderstanding to respect. That day, the HOA wasn't just facing a stubborn homeowner. They were meeting a team, brothers and sisters bound by service and honor. And that changed everything. A few days after that meeting, there was a quiet knock at my door. It was the same HOA board member, the retired logistics officer. He didn't come with papers or complaints this time. He came with something else, honesty. He stepped inside, looked around at the house and sighed. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I've been carrying a secret, one I never shared with anyone here." He told me he'd served in the military too. Logistics, like he said before, but he had kept it hidden. After leaving service, he wanted to leave that chapter behind. But seeing my house, it stirred up memories he thought he'd buried. He admitted something I never expected. "I was afraid to speak up before because your home was too loud a reminder, too close to the life I wanted to forget." For a moment, the room was heavy with unspoken truths. He said he understood now that the house wasn't about showing off or being militant. It was about survival, respect, and remembrance. Then he surprised me. He wanted to help. He suggested we bring this story to the community, not just in meetings behind closed doors, but openly, through a town forum. A place where neighbors could hear the real story, meet the people behind the house, and understand the meaning of the design. "I want to help you turn this around," he said, "because this is bigger than just one house or one fight." His words hit me hard. Sometimes, those who judge the loudest carry the heaviest silence. And sometimes, understanding begins when someone has the courage to break that silence. That day I realized the battle wasn't just against the HOA. It was about healing old wounds. Ours, theirs, and maybe even the whole neighborhood's. Together, we would tell the story.
and maybe, just maybe, we could change hearts. The town hall was packed. Neighbors crowded the room, some curious, some skeptical, others quietly supportive. The air buzzed with whispers and cautious glances. The story of my tactical house had spread faster than I expected. But this was our chance, not to argue, not to fight, but to share. I stood before them, flanked by my veteran friends, each one ready to tell their part of the story. The room grew quiet as I began. I told them about my years as a combat engineer, about the bond we shared, the trust it takes to build something strong, something that lasts. I explained how we designed the house together, piece by piece, using the skills we'd honed in places where failure meant danger. I described the reinforced walls, not to keep people out, but to keep the family safe during storms. I talked about the solar panels and rainwater systems, not as oddities, but as lifelines in times of crisis. I shared the sweat, the laughter, the long nights spent making this house a home. As I spoke, I saw faces soften, the fear and suspicion began to fade. One neighbor, a mother of two, raised her hand and asked, "So it's not a bunker, it's a tribute." Exactly. It's a home built with care, experience, and hope. It's a symbol of readiness, not war. Others chimed in, asking questions about the sustainable features, the community safety plans we were developing. The tone shifted. Where there had been whispers of fear, now there was curiosity and respect. People who once saw the house as an eyesore began to see it as a resource, a model for resilience. By the end of the meeting, some neighbors came up to thank us, to learn more, to connect. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for understanding. We hadn't just defended a house. We'd opened a door to new conversations, new respect, and a stronger community. Sometimes, standing up isn't just about fighting back, it's about reaching out. And that day, we reached far beyond the walls of that too-tactical house. A few weeks later, the HOA sent a formal notice. They were withdrawing the complaint, not just because of legal pressure or public opinion, but because they saw the truth behind the house. In a surprising turn, they asked me to help design an emergency readiness plan for the entire neighborhood. Suddenly, the features they once criticized, solar panels, reinforced walls, rainwater systems, became something the community wanted. Neighbors began knocking on my door, asking how they could install similar systems for their own homes. Some even asked for advice on making their yards more resilient to storms. It felt like the neighborhood was changing, not just in design, but in spirit. Being different had once made me an outcast. Now it made me a leader. I realized something important. Being different doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it means you're ahead. My home was never meant to fit a mold. It was built with purpose, with heart, with a past that shaped every inch of it. And in the end, it wasn't just a house. It was a testament to resilience, to brotherhood, to the power of standing firm in who you are. They called it tactical. We called it home. And that was enough. Sometimes, people fear what they don't understand. But when we take time to listen, what looked like a threat might turn out to be a gift. Have you ever had to defend something you believed in? Have you ever felt misunderstood for trying to do the right thing? If this story moved you, please like, comment, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ever had to stand their ground. Until next time, stay strong, stay respectful, and always build something that matters.